Widowed woman's Halloween horror. Cabin not as empty as she thought. Daisy Henderson's breath fogged the cold air as a flashlight beam caught something that didn't belong, a half-eaten sandwich, a pile of blankets, and muddy footprints leading to the corner of the attic. Her hands shook. She had locked this cabin 3 years ago after her husband's death. No one was supposed to be here. A faint sound broke the silence, a soft whimper, like a child's cry. Daisy froze. "Who's there?" she whispered, voice trembling. The sound came again, this time closer. She stepped backward, heart racing, her flashlight flickering. The attic smelled of dust and damp clothes, but underneath it was something new, the smell of someone living there. She had come here to spend Halloween weekend alone, to face her memories and finally let go. But now, standing in the dark attic with fear crawling up her spine, Daisy realized she wasn't alone at all. Someone had been watching her, waiting. What would you do if you found someone secretly living in your home? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story will shock you even more. 3 years had passed since Daisy Henderson lost her husband, David. The heart attack came without warning. One moment, he was laughing while fixing the fence in their backyard in Traverse City, and the next, he was gone. The doctors said it was instant, that he didn't suffer, but Daisy had. Every day since had been a blur of routine and quiet. She woke, ate alone, worked a few hours at the small-town library, and came home to silence. The world kept moving, but she hadn't. Her grown children, Ben and Laura, tried their best to pull her back to life, inviting her for dinners, suggesting she join a local group for widows, even planning a family trip. She always said she wasn't ready. Truth was, she didn't know what ready meant anymore. David's laughter still echoed in her mind. His clothes still hung in their closet. Even his glasses sat on the nightstand, just where he'd left them. She couldn't bring herself to move them. The cabin in Hiawatha National Forest had been David's idea. A quiet place 40 miles from Marquette, surrounded by endless trees and near Lake Superior. They'd built it together 20 years ago, back when their children were small. Every summer, they came here to fish, roast marshmallows, and watch storms roll over the water. It had been their place, untouched by the rest of the world. After David died, Daisy couldn't return. The idea of walking through those rooms without him felt unbearable. But as the third Halloween since his death approached, something inside her changed. She couldn't explain it clearly, even to herself. It wasn't bravery, exactly, it was exhaustion. She was tired of living in half-light, tired of avoiding everything that reminded her of him. So, she made a quiet decision, 5 days alone at the cabin. No visitors, no phone calls. Just her, David's things, and the silence. She would sort through what he left behind, say goodbye properly, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to move forward. Her children didn't take the news well. "Mom, it's too far out," Laura had said over the phone, her voice tight with worry. "It's Halloween weekend, for crying out loud. There's barely any service there." Ben added, "At least let us come with you. You don't have to do this alone." But Daisy stood firm. "I need to. It's time." The morning she left, the sky hung heavy with clouds, and the cold wind hinted at early snow. She packed David's flannel shirt, her journal, canned soup, a few logs of firewood, and the old photo album they'd kept by the fireplace. As she drove north, civilization slipped away, the roads narrowed, trees thickened, and radio signals vanished. The final stretch was a dirt road winding through tall pines, the forest floor blanketed with orange leaves. Her tires crunched over gravel as she turned onto the familiar path leading to the cabin. For a moment, she felt a strange comfort. The woods hadn't changed. The air still smelled of pine and earth. But as daylight faded, the comfort shifted to unease. By the time she arrived, dusk had fallen. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, weathered, the porch steps sagging, paint peeling from the shutters. A single lantern hung by the door, still rusted from years past. When she opened the door, the smell of old wood and dust hit her. She paused, standing in the doorway, staring at the life she'd locked away for 3 years. David's boots sat by the wall. His fishing hat hung from the hook beside the door. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. Daisy ran her fingers across the old dining table where they used to play cards, then down the frame of the photo that hung by the fireplace, David smiling with a trout in his hands, sun on his face. Her chest tightened. She wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Instead, she exhaled slowly, trying to ground herself. "This is it," she whispered. 5 days. Just 5 days. She unpacked her things, swept the floor, and lit the old kerosene lamp. Shadows flickered across the walls as the fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. The sound was both soothing and unnerving, like the forest was alive and listening. Her phone showed no signal, not even one bar. The silence was complete, broken only by the snapping wood in the fireplace. As night settled, Daisy sat in the rocking chair, clutching David's old flannel around her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt his presence, not in the supernatural sense, but in the way memory lingers, soft and heavy. This was what she came for: closure, understanding, maybe peace. She had no idea that by returning here, she wasn't stepping into silence. She was walking straight into something she could never have prepared for. The fire crackled softly, throwing orange light against the cabin walls. Daisy sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through the pages of her old photo album. The air inside was warm but carried the faint scent of dust and age. Outside, the forest pressed close, its branches scraping gently against the windows as the wind shifted. It had been years since she'd heard the sounds of the woods at night, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the steady rhythm of crickets. At first, it felt peaceful, like the forest was welcoming her back. But as the evening deepened, that peace began to thin. Every creak of the floorboards and groan of the wind seemed louder than it should have been. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The fire was dying down, and the shadows had grown longer, crawling up the walls like they were alive. She decided to head to bed, blowing out the lamp and pulling David's old flannel tighter around her shoulders. The bedroom was cold, the kind of cold that crept under the blankets and settled in the bones. Daisy pulled the quilt to her chin and closed her eyes, listening to the quiet. For a while, sleep came in small waves. But around 2 a.m., something woke her. A sound. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Footsteps. They came from the porch, boards creaking under weight. Daisy's eyes snapped open. She held her breath, trying to listen. For a moment, silence. Then another step. And another. She sat up, heart pounding in her chest. Maybe it was an animal. A deer, perhaps. Or a raccoon. She tried to convince herself of that as she reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. The sound came again, closer now. It wasn't scurrying or scratching. It was pacing. Someone, or something, was walking back and forth just outside her door. Daisy's throat went dry. She whispered into the darkness, "Hello." No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then came the metallic sound of the door handle rattling. Once. Twice. Slowly. Her breath caught. She turned the flashlight toward the door, its beam trembling in her shaking hands. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice cracking. Still nothing. Only the faint moan of the wind outside. The handle stopped moving. She waited, straining to hear. After several seconds, the sound of footsteps resumed, but this time, moving away from the cabin. She didn't move for a long time. Every muscle in her body was tight. Her mind raced. If it was a person, they would have spoken. If it was an animal, why would it try the door handle? She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace and sat in the armchair by the window, keeping watch. Outside, darkness swallowed the forest. Every so often, the trees swayed and something cracked in the distance, making her flinch. Hours passed like that, Daisy clutching the poker, eyes darting from window to window, waiting for another sound. But none came. By dawn, her exhaustion was stronger than her fear. She finally stood and cracked the front door open, letting in the cold morning air. Her breath came out in a visible puff as she stepped onto the porch. The ground was wet with dew, and that's when she saw them. Tracks. Large, deep impressions in the soft earth, circling the cabin. Her heart slowed a little as she recognized the shape. Bear tracks. She let out a shaky laugh of relief. "Of course," she whispered. "Just a bear." It made sense. Maybe it had sniffed around, curious, even pressed against the door. Still, something didn't sit right. The prints looked odd. Some were uneven, overlapping. And there were scuff marks on the steps, like someone had dragged their heel, not paws. She brushed the thought aside. Her nerves were just playing tricks after a sleepless night. Back inside, she brewed coffee on the small gas stove, the sound of boiling water oddly comforting. The daylight gave her courage, and she told herself last night had been nothing more than her imagination and an overactive mind in an empty cabin. Yet, as she sipped her coffee by the window, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her eyes kept drifting toward the tree line. The forest looked peaceful in the morning light, golden leaves drifting down in slow spirals. But the longer she stared, the more she was sure she saw something, movement between the trees. A shadow, gone as quickly as it appeared. She stepped closer to the window, heart picking up again. Nothing. Just trees and fog. Still, she closed the curtains and locked the door, telling herself she was being foolish. The rest of the morning passed in quiet unease. A spoon she swore she'd placed on the counter was suddenly in the sink. A draft moved through the hallway though all windows were shut. Her nerves stayed sharp, every sound amplified, the ticking clock, the floorboards creaking as if under light footsteps. At one point, she caught herself whispering, "It's just the house settling." Saying it out loud made her feel safer, even if she didn't believe it. By noon, Daisy forced herself to focus on her purpose for being there. She began sorting through David's things, his fishing gear, his journals, the stack of letters they'd exchanged when they were younger. It helped to ground her, to push the fear back where it belonged. Still, when a branch snapped outside, she startled so violently that her cup spilled across the table. She froze, waiting for another sound. But none came. The rest of that day, she couldn't shake one thought. The footsteps on the porch weren't the uneven shuffle of an animal. They were the slow, steady steps of a person. The next morning greeted Daisy with a thin fog that rolled in from the trees and lingered low to the ground. The air was colder, heavier somehow. Halloween morning. She tried to shake off the unease that had followed her since the night before. She brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and told herself she was being silly. This was just a quiet forest, not a horror movie. The cabin creaked softly as it warmed from the fire. She decided to distract herself by sorting more of David's belongings. She started in the living room, opening boxes filled with old fishing maps, his notebooks, and family photos. Hours passed quietly until something caught her eye. David's glasses, his reading pair, were sitting on the table. She paused. She hadn't taken them out. She was certain they'd been left on the bedroom dresser when she arrived. A chill ran through her. Maybe she'd moved them and forgotten. Grief did strange things to memory, she reasoned. She carried them back to the dresser, placing them exactly where they belonged. A few minutes later, while folding David's old clothes by the couch, she heard a small clink. When she turned, the glasses were back on the table. Her heart skipped. She stood frozen for a long moment, her throat tightening. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible." To calm herself, she forced a laugh and muttered, "You're just tired, Daisy. You didn't move them." But when she reached out to touch the frames, the metal felt warm, as if someone else had just been holding them. Trying to shake off the fear, she moved on. As she dusted the mantel, the framed photo of her and David, taken the summer before he died, suddenly toppled forward and hit the floor. The glass cracked clean down the middle. She stared at it, stunned. She knelt to pick it up and noticed something strange. The photo was damp, even though the floor was dry. It was as if moisture had seeped into the frame from nowhere. She replaced it, only to hear it fall again moments later. This time, she didn't touch it. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering. Her phone still had no signal. The idea of calling someone for reassurance wasn't even an option. She turned on the radio, just static. For the first time, the silence of the woods didn't feel peaceful. It felt pressing, like it was holding its breath with her. In the kitchen, she ran water to wash her hands. The faucet groaned loudly, spraying harder than it should have. When she turned it off, it hissed back to life again, full pressure, without her touching it. She yelped, stumbling backward, her pulse racing. She grabbed the handle and twisted it tight until it stopped. She stood there breathing heavily, water dripping from her fingers, trying to reason with herself. Maybe the pipes had air trapped inside. Maybe it was just the old plumbing. That had to be it. She repeated it over and over. Still, unease clung to her like static. Every sound made her jump. The crack of wood in the fire, the distant call of a crow, even her own footsteps on the old boards. It all felt wrong. By mid-afternoon, the fog outside thickened, turning the world gray. The light inside the cabin dimmed, and shadows gathered in corners. Daisy decided she needed a distraction. She went to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal, but as she turned toward the hall, something caught her eye, just a flicker of movement near the ceiling. She looked up. The attic door was open. The wooden ladder hung down halfway, its metal latch unhooked. Daisy's stomach dropped. She remembered clearly. She had locked that latch when she first arrived. She had even tested it. The attic was the one place she hadn't gone yet, and she didn't plan to. She stared at the open square in the ceiling, the darkness above seeming to pulse. Her mouth went dry. "No," she whispered under her breath. "No, I didn't open that." Her mind raced. Maybe it had been the draft. Maybe the latch had rusted loose. But that didn't explain the ladder being pulled down. For several minutes, she stood motionless beneath it, staring upward. Her skin prickled with cold. A faint sound came from above, something small, shifting. She strained to listen. It stopped. Fear crawled through her chest, but so did something else. A pull, a strange sense that she needed to know what was up there. Maybe it was the same part of her that drove her here in the first place, the need to face what she'd been avoiding. Her hands shook as she reached for the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom as she pointed it toward the open space above. Dust floated down in lazy spirals. "If it's an animal, it's fine," she told herself out loud, trying to control her voice. "I just need to check." She placed her foot on the first rung of the ladder. It creaked loudly, echoing through the cabin. The sound made her flinch, but she continued. Her breath came fast and shallow. The closer she got to the top, the colder the air felt. Halfway up, she paused and listened again. Nothing. Only silence thick enough to make her ears ring. She lifted the flashlight higher, scanning the darkness above, the narrow beams, the old insulation, the storage boxes David had once stacked neatly in the corners. A small noise broke the quiet. Not loud, but clear. A shuffle. Daisy froze. Her flashlight wavered. The beam caught a glint, something metallic, maybe a can or a lantern. She couldn't tell. Her heartbeat thudded in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to go back down, but her hands moved on their own. She climbed another step. The wood groaned beneath her weight. "Hello," she said, barely above a whisper. The silence seemed to stretch forever. Then, faintly, almost too soft to believe, she heard what sounded like a breath. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She swallowed, forcing herself to climb the last step. As her head rose above the floor of the attic, the flashlight flickered. She caught a glimpse of something, a shape among the boxes. Something was up there, watching. The beam steadied, and for a split second, Daisy wished she hadn't come. Daisy's flashlight beam trembled as she slowly pulled herself up through the attic opening. Dust filled the air, and the smell was different up here, stale, but not untouched. Someone had been in this space recently. Her boots landed on the wooden floorboards with a soft thud. She turned in a slow circle, the light sweeping over the space she hadn't entered since David was alive. At first glance, it looked almost normal: storage boxes, a few old blankets, the outline of forgotten furniture. But in the far corner, something caught her attention, a cleared patch of floor that didn't belong. The dust there was disturbed, footprints pressed deep into the wood. She took a hesitant step forward, her breath trembling in the cold air. The beam of her flashlight steadied on what lay before her, a rolled-out sleeping bag, flattened and worn, beside a small pile of personal belongings, a few half-empty water bottles, a stack of old paperbacks, and a battery lantern that still faintly glowed. Her heart thudded in her ears. None of this was hers. A folded piece of paper sat neatly on top of a book. Daisy's hand shook as she reached for it. The handwriting was messy but careful. "I'm sorry for the intrusion. I mean no harm." She stared at the note, unable to move. A chill ran through her chest that wasn't from the cold. Someone had been living here. In her attic. While she was sleeping beneath them. Her throat tightened. Every sound from the last few days replayed in her mind. The footsteps, the door handle, the misplaced glasses. It all made sense now. The truth hit harder than fear itself. She hadn't been imagining it. Her first instinct was to run, to get out and lock the door, maybe even try for her car despite the distance. But her legs wouldn't move. Something in her refused to turn away. A soft noise broke the stillness. A whimper, fragile and human, came from behind a stack of boxes near the far wall. Daisy's flashlight darted in that direction. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. No answer. Just a muffled sniff, followed by a faint plea. "Please, don't call the police." The voice was small. Frightened. Daisy's fear shifted into something different, still sharp, but mixed with confusion. She took a slow step forward. "I won't," she said quietly. "But you need to come out." Silence again. She waited, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Then, movement. A figure stepped hesitantly into the beam of light. It was a girl, no older than 15 or 16. Her auburn hair was tangled and hung in messy strands around her pale face. She wore several layers of thin clothing that looked scavenged, an oversized hoodie, torn jeans, and shoes too big for her feet. Her eyes were wide, rimmed red from tears and exhaustion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Daisy could barely breathe. All her fear drained into something else entirely. Shock, sorrow, disbelief. The girl's hands were trembling, her body so thin it looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Daisy lowered the flashlight slightly, trying to sound calm. "You've been staying here." The girl nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. I didn't mean to. I was just cold. I thought it was empty. I didn't think anyone would come back. Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. She looked terrified, not of being caught, but of what might happen next. Daisy's chest ached as she took in the sight of her. This wasn't a criminal. This was a child who'd been hiding, surviving, scared enough to live in an abandoned cabin miles from anyone. How long have you been here? Daisy asked softly. The girl hesitated. Since the end of summer. I found food in the cabinets. I cleaned up after myself. I swear. I didn't touch anything of yours. Daisy felt her throat tighten again, this time from emotion. She saw the thin blanket, the empty bottles, the way the girl's hands clutched her sleeves for warmth. The reality sank in. This wasn't some haunting. It was something painfully human. What's your name? Daisy asked gently. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. Lucy. The name hung in the air, fragile and real. Daisy let out a long, shaky breath, lowering the flashlight completely. It's okay, Lucy, she said after a pause. You're safe now. Lucy looked up, uncertain. You're not going to make me leave. Daisy shook her head slowly. No. But you have to come downstairs. It's freezing up here. For a moment, Lucy didn't move, as if waiting for a trick. Then, cautiously, she stepped out from behind the boxes. The flashlight caught her face again. Young, scared, but not dangerous. Daisy reached out her hand, her own fear fading into something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. As they descended the ladder together, Daisy glanced back once at the attic corner. The makeshift bed, the small pile of belongings, the quiet apology written on that single piece of paper. The horror she'd felt just minutes ago had changed shape. She wasn't afraid of who was in the cabin anymore. She was afraid of what had driven a girl like Lucy to hide there in the first place. Daisy sat on the wooden floor of the attic, her hands still shaking, eyes fixed on the trembling girl in front of her. Lucy's face was pale and streaked with dirt, her lips chapped, eyes wide with fear. She looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Daisy's heart was still pounding, but she lowered the fireplace poker slowly and took a small step forward. It's okay, Daisy whispered, her voice quiet but steady. You're safe now. Lucy didn't answer at first. She held her hands close to her chest, clutching a small torn backpack like it was her only protection in the world. Finally, in a thin, quivering voice, she said, I didn't mean to scare you. I just needed somewhere warm. I thought no one lived here. Daisy tried to find words. Her mind still raced with confusion and fear, but there was something about the girl's eyes, something lost and pleading, that pulled at her heart. How long have you been here? She asked softly. About 2 weeks, Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw the place from the road. It looked empty. I was just trying to stay alive. The words hit Daisy like a slow wave. 2 weeks. A child, no more than 16, had been living above her head, in her late husband's old cabin, all alone. The attic air felt heavier now, filled not with danger but with sorrow. Lucy's story began to pour out, trembling and broken. She told Daisy about the night she ran away, about how she'd moved through the Michigan woods, hiding from headlights and sleeping under trees. I've been in the system since I was 11, she said. Foster care. 7 different homes. None of them worked out. Daisy listened in silence, her flashlight resting on the floor between them, casting faint gold light over Lucy's dirt-smeared face. My parents died, Lucy continued. Car accident near Mackinac Bridge. They said a truck lost control on the ice. I don't remember much. Just fire and snow. Her voice cracked on the last word. Daisy's chest tightened. She could see the pain in Lucy's small frame, the exhaustion that went far deeper than hunger. "They sent me to Escanaba," Lucy said after a pause. "The last foster home was bad. I tried to tell people, but nobody believed me. My foster brother, she stopped, swallowing hard. I couldn't stay there anymore." The attic fell silent except for the faint creak of wind against the cabin roof. Daisy didn't rush her. She could see how hard it was for the girl to speak. "I had a little money from my summer job," Lucy said quietly. "Just enough for food. I was trying to reach my aunt in Duluth. I thought she'd take me in. But it's far, and I ran out of money. I walked for days. I was cold, tired, and I saw this place during a storm. I just needed to rest." Daisy looked around at the sleeping bag, the water bottles lined neatly beside it, the small lantern. It wasn't the setup of a thief. It was survival. "So you stayed," Daisy murmured. "Only until I could figure out what to do next," Lucy said quickly, as if afraid of being scolded. "I didn't take anything, I swear. I just needed a roof over my head." The words carried a simple truth that broke something open inside Daisy. She had come here to escape her own pain, to hide from the world. But this girl hadn't had the luxury of hiding. She had been running for her life. Daisy took a deep breath. Her first instinct had been to call the police, to make this someone else's problem. But looking at Lucy, thin, terrified, trembling, she saw a reflection of something she recognized, the hollow, haunted look of someone who'd lost everything. "How old are you?" Daisy asked. 16. Lucy whispered. Daisy nodded slowly. "Do you have your aunt's number?" Lucy shook her head. "It's written somewhere, in my old phone. But it broke." She gave a small, helpless shrug. "I thought I could maybe find her house. I remembered the name of the street. But I didn't make it." The flashlight flickered briefly, and Daisy could see Lucy fighting back tears. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," she said again, voice breaking. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." Daisy felt a lump form in her throat. Her fear began to melt into something else, something heavy but clear. This wasn't a criminal hiding in her attic. This was a child the world had forgotten. "You must be freezing," Daisy said softly. "Come downstairs. You need food and warmth." Lucy hesitated, eyes darting toward the attic stairs. "You're not mad?" Daisy almost laughed, but her voice was thick with emotion. "Mad? I'm shocked, yes. But not mad. No one should be alone like this." Lucy blinked, unsure how to respond. She seemed to expect anger, punishment, anything but kindness. As Daisy led her down the narrow steps, the air in the cabin shifted. What had felt like a haunted house hours earlier now carried a quiet, fragile hope. Lucy's small footsteps followed behind, hesitant, uncertain, but real. At the bottom of the stairs, Daisy turned to look at her again. "We'll figure this out," she said. "You're safe here tonight." For a long moment, Lucy didn't speak. Then, in a voice so soft Daisy almost missed it, she whispered, "Thank you." Daisy nodded, still unsure what she would do next, but certain of one thing: calling the authorities right now didn't feel right. Not yet. This girl needed care before consequences, understanding before judgment. As she handed Lucy a blanket and set a kettle to boil, Daisy realized something she hadn't in years. Her heart, once numb from grief, was beating with purpose again. Daisy stood in the dim cabin kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee she barely tasted. Lucy sat at the small wooden table, wrapped in one of David's old flannel blankets. Her wet hair clung to her face as steam rose from the soup Daisy had hurriedly warmed on the stove. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of firewood and the faint wind brushing against the windows. Every instinct in Daisy's body was torn. Part of her still trembled from the discovery, the shock of realizing someone had been living above her for weeks. But another part, the one that hadn't felt alive in years, refused to turn away. The girl across from her wasn't a threat. She was a wound that the world had ignored. "You can eat as much as you want," Daisy said finally, her voice gentle but steady. "There's more soup, and bread too." Lucy looked up, her eyes wary. "Thank you," she murmured. "I didn't mean to take anything. I just didn't know where else to go." "I know," Daisy said softly. "You don't need to explain again. You've had enough fear for one lifetime." Lucy's spoon clinked against the bowl as she took small bites. Her fingers shook with each movement. Daisy watched quietly, the flickering light from the fireplace reflecting in her tired eyes. She thought about calling the sheriff, about reporting everything. But when she pictured Lucy's terrified face, the thought made her chest ache. Would they treat her as a child in danger, or just another runaway? Daisy had seen too much of how people were categorized and forgotten. She'd seen what the system could miss. "I haven't had real food in days," Lucy whispered after a moment. "I was living on granola bars and apples. I didn't want to steal." "You're not stealing," Daisy said. "You're surviving." Lucy's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "Nobody ever says that. They just tell me to be grateful or to stop causing trouble." Daisy sat across from her, hands clasped together on the table. "Lucy, you're not trouble. You're a person who deserves to feel safe." For a while, they just sat there, two strangers bound by loneliness. The storm outside had eased to a light drizzle, but the air inside felt heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Daisy spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "You said your foster home in Escanaba wasn't safe. Do you want to tell me what happened?" Lucy hesitated. Her eyes dropped to her soup. "It's not easy." "You don't have to," Daisy said quickly. "Not if it hurts too much." Lucy drew in a deep breath, her hands tightening on the blanket. "I tried to tell the caseworker," she said quietly. "My foster brother, he was older. 17. He used to wait until everyone went to bed. I locked my door every night, but one night the lock broke. I screamed, but his parents said I was lying, that I was trying to cause trouble because I wanted to leave. The caseworker said she didn't have proof." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "So I ran." Daisy's heart twisted. Her breath came unevenly. She'd felt fear before, but never like this kind, the kind that burned with anger for someone else. She reached across the table and gently laid her hand over Lucy's trembling one. "You did the right thing by running," Daisy said firmly. "No one should have to live like that. You were right to get away." Lucy nodded, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "I just didn't know where to go. I thought if I could find my aunt, she'd understand. She used to send birthday cards before she got sick. But I didn't even know if she still lived in Duluth." Daisy leaned back in her chair, the weight of the girl's words settling deep inside her. She remembered her own nights of silence after David's death, the endless hours spent talking to no one, crying into the dark. She'd shut herself away, convincing herself that isolation was safer than connection. Now, hearing Lucy's trembling voice, Daisy realized how similar they were, both lost in their own kind of emptiness. She stood and poured Lucy another cup of warm tea. "Lucy," she said quietly, "you're not alone anymore. You don't have to keep running." Lucy looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean we'll figure this out together. Tomorrow morning, we'll drive into Marquette. I have a friend there. She's a lawyer. She can help us contact the right people. If the system won't protect you properly, We'll find another way. But we'll do it the right way, not in fear. Lucy blinked at her, as if unsure she'd heard correctly. You do that for me? Yes, Daisy said simply. You've been through enough. You deserve someone who listens. For the first time since Daisy had met her, Lucy smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but real. She whispered, I thought you'd call the police. I thought about it, Daisy admitted. But something in me said no. You don't call the police on someone who's just trying to stay alive. The words came easily, surprising even herself. She realized how much her fear had shifted. She wasn't thinking about ghosts or noises anymore. She was thinking about a child who had been silenced by the world. Lucy's voice trembled. Why are you being so kind to me? Daisy paused, her throat tightening. Because you reminded me that kindness matters, she said softly. I've spent 3 years hiding from life, thinking my pain made me useless. My husband, David, died in that chair over there. Heart attack. I couldn't save him. After that, I stopped trying to save anything, including myself. But tonight, you made me remember something I forgot. Helping someone else is how we start to live again. Lucy covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming silently. I didn't mean to make trouble for you. You didn't, Daisy said, reaching across the table. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a reason to care again. The fire crackled softly between them, its warmth filling the small space. Outside, the grey afternoon light began to fade into the long shadows of Halloween evening. Daisy poured more tea, and for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt alive. They sat together for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Lucy spoke about the family she'd stayed with, the good ones and the bad, and the small things that kept her going: music, drawing, the stars. Daisy shared memories of David, the way he laughed too loud, the way he believed kindness could fix almost anything. She hadn't spoken his name out loud in months, and the sound of it no longer broke her, it steadied her. When Lucy finally began to yawn, Daisy guided her to the small guest room. You can sleep here tonight, she said softly. Lock the door if you want to. You're safe. Lucy hesitated in the doorway. What if they find me? She whispered. They won't, Daisy said. You're not alone anymore. As Daisy watched the girl disappear into the room, she felt something deep inside her shift, a quiet, certain strength she hadn't felt since before David's death. She whispered to the empty air, We'll fix this, David. I'll make it right. That night, Daisy didn't feel haunted. She felt awake. By evening, the wind from Lake Superior had turned into a full storm. Trees groaned under the force of it, and rain lashed against the windows like handfuls of thrown gravel. The sky outside was a restless swirl of grey and black, thunder rolling through the forest like a warning. Daisy had seen many storms in this cabin, but tonight felt different. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of being alone, because she wasn't. Lucy sat cross-legged on the rug near the fire, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot cocoa from a mug too big for her hands. The flickering flames painted warm light across her tired face. Daisy sat across from her, poking at the logs, the orange sparks reflecting in her eyes. The storm roared outside, but inside, it was calm. There was comfort in the sound of the fire, the soft rustle of the blanket, and the quiet between their words. Lucy broke the silence first. You really loved him, didn't you? Daisy's chest tightened. She stared into the flames before nodding. I did. David was everything I wasn't. Loud, friendly, always finding a reason to help someone. He used to say, if you can make one person's day easier, you've done something right. Lucy smiled faintly. Sounds like someone people remembered. Yeah, Daisy said softly. They did. He worked for the Park Service, spent half his life rescuing lost hikers, fixing trails, and giving away our food to campers who forgot theirs. He was the kind of man who didn't just talk about being good. He showed up. Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't look away from the fire. When he died, I thought all that light went with him. I stopped answering calls, stopped going out. My kids tried to help, but I couldn't face anyone. It was easier to stay frozen than admit he was gone. Lucy set her mug down and hugged her knees. I know what that feels like, she whispered. When my parents died, people stopped calling after a few weeks. They said they were sorry, but they didn't want to hear me cry anymore. Daisy's eyes softened. That must have been so hard. Lucy nodded. It was like being erased. Everyone moved on, and I was still stuck at the crash site in my head. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. Sometimes, I think being in foster care hurt more than losing them. I kept hoping someone would look at me and see more than a problem to manage. Daisy reached out and gently touched her hand. You're not a problem, Lucy. You're a survivor. There's a difference. For a while, they listened to the storm pound against the roof. It felt like the world outside was fighting itself, but inside, something fragile and hopeful was taking shape. Lucy glanced toward the window. Do you think the storm will stop soon? It always does, Daisy said with a small smile. They never last forever. A long silence passed before Lucy spoke again. Daisy, what do you think makes someone a good person? The question hung in the air. Daisy thought about it, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. I used to think being good meant being perfect, she said slowly. But David taught me something different. He said goodness isn't about being fearless, it's about doing the right thing even when you're scared or tired or broken. Especially when it's hard. Lucy nodded thoughtfully. So, being good is just choosing to care even when it hurts. Exactly, Daisy said. Caring is the bravest thing you can do. Outside, the thunder rolled again, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the entire room for a brief, brilliant second. Lucy flinched, then laughed softly. I used to be terrified of storms. I'd hide in the bathroom with my blanket. David used to do that too, Daisy said with a grin. He'd claim he was checking for leaks, but really, he just didn't like thunder. They both laughed, genuinely, easily. It felt good, like releasing something heavy they'd both been holding for too long. The storm continued into the night, but the fear that had haunted the cabin the night before was gone. They told stories about everything: David's terrible cooking, Lucy's dream of becoming an artist, the funny people they'd met in passing. The fire burned low, but the warmth lingered. When the old clock on the mantel struck midnight, Daisy looked up. The rain had softened, and the thunder had faded into the distance. Halloween was officially over. November had arrived quietly, as though the storm had carried away the last of their ghosts. Come on, Daisy said, standing up and motioning to the door. Let's see what's left of the world out there. Lucy hesitated, then followed her. Together, they stepped onto the porch, wrapped in blankets. The air was cold and sharp with the smell of wet pine. Overhead, the clouds broke apart, revealing a clear, star-filled sky. The moonlight shimmered on puddles and the glistening trees around the cabin. It's beautiful, Lucy whispered. It is, Daisy agreed. You'd never know there was a storm here an hour ago. They stood in silence, the cool air brushing their faces. The stars above seemed endless, bright against the deep blue of the clearing night. After a while, Lucy spoke quietly. Daisy, I need to tell you something. Daisy turned to her, curious. What is it? Lucy hesitated, then looked down at her shoes. Last night, the noise on the porch. The door handle. It was me. Daisy blinked, startled. You? Lucy nodded quickly. I didn't mean to scare you. I was just trying to make sure you were asleep before I came down to get food. When you called out, I panicked and ran back to the attic. Her voice broke a little. I'm really sorry. For a moment, Daisy stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, laughter burst out of her. It started softly, then grew into real, uncontrollable laughter that echoed through the trees. Lucy looked stunned, then started laughing too. Oh, Lucy, Daisy managed between laughs, wiping her eyes. All this time I thought I was haunted by my husband, or losing my mind, and it turns out my ghost was just a hungry teenager. Lucy's laughter turned into tears, the good kind. I didn't mean to be a ghost, she said through a smile. Daisy pulled her into a hug. You weren't, she said softly. You were the sign I needed to stop hiding from life. They stood together on the porch as the last of the storm clouds drifted away. The world felt different, lighter. The fear that had once filled the cabin had been replaced with something stronger, understanding. Daisy looked up at the stars, whispering as if to David. I'm okay now. Really. Inside, the fire still glowed faintly, its warmth stretching into the corners of the once lonely cabin. The storm had passed, but something new had begun, a quiet, steady bond built from shared pain, laughter, and the courage to face the unknown. Sometimes, Daisy thought, storms weren't meant to destroy. They were meant to clear the air so light could find its way back in. Daisy had promised, and this time she intended to keep it. The morning after Halloween, the sky over Lake Superior glowed with the pale gold of early November, a soft calm after the wild storm. Lucy slept soundly in the back seat, wrapped in Daisy's old flannel jacket, while the road wound along the water toward Marquette. For the first time in 3 years, Daisy felt she was driving toward something instead of away. At Presque Isle Park, they stopped for breakfast sandwiches and hot cocoa, sitting by the rocky shore. The lake stretched endlessly, the wind crisp but forgiving. Lucy leaned against her, quiet, watching the water ripple. It's so big, she whispered. Daisy smiled. Yeah. It makes you realize how small your fears really are. By late morning, they met Daisy's lawyer friend, Ellen, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried quiet authority. She listened without interruption as Lucy shared her story, the neglect, the fear, the night she ran. Daisy held Lucy's hand through every word. For the first time, Lucy's truth wasn't questioned. It was recorded, respected, and acted upon. Ellen filed the necessary reports immediately, triggering an investigation. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, signatures, and visits. Daisy stayed involved at every step. She attended hearings, comforted Lucy during interviews, and made sure no one brushed her story aside. Slowly, pieces began to fall into place. Other children came forward, their complaints matching Lucy's. The foster family's license was suspended, then permanently revoked. Criminal charges followed. It was justice long delayed, but finally happening. When Lucy was temporarily placed in a Marquette group home, Daisy visited every weekend. She brought books, homemade cookies, and laughter that neither of them had realized they missed. The once timid girl began to smile more easily, and Daisy found herself smiling back, feeling a strange warmth bloom in a part of her heart she thought was gone. By Thanksgiving, a new possibility emerged. Lucy's aunt, a schoolteacher in Duluth, had been located and approved as a guardian. The reunion was both joyful and gut-wrenching. Lucy ran into her aunt's arms, sobbing from relief. Daisy stood back, watching, tears in her own eyes, not of sadness, but gratitude. She had helped this child find safety, family, and a future. That was something David would have been proud of. Even after Lucy settled in Duluth, they stayed close. Calls every week. Letters filled with small victories, new friends, good grades, laughter. Daisy had become more than a rescuer. She was family now, the steady presence Lucy could trust. Over time, Daisy noticed something remarkable happening inside herself. The crushing weight of grief that once paralyzed her began to lift. It wasn't gone, grief never really disappears, but it had changed shape. It had become something she could carry with purpose. David's absence no longer felt like a void. It was a space filled with memories, lessons, and the love she now poured into helping someone else heal. That Halloween had reshaped everything. Daisy had gone to the cabin to hide from life, only to discover that life had come knocking, literally, on her door, needing her to open it. Fear had once ruled her nights, but compassion had given her strength. She learned that courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you act anyway, especially when someone else's safety depends on it. Months later, when summer came, Daisy returned to the cabin with Lucy, her aunt, and her cousin. Together they painted the faded wood, fixed the porch rail, and planted wildflowers along the path. Laughter echoed through the trees. The cabin that once felt haunted by loss now felt alive again. It wasn't just a place of memories. It was a promise of new beginnings. Before they left, Daisy and Lucy mounted a small plaque beside the door. It read, "Sometimes the scariest moments lead to the most beautiful connections." That night, they walked down to the lake. The stars shimmered above like tiny lanterns scattered across the black water. Lucy stood beside her, arms wrapped in a blanket, her eyes reflecting both the starlight and the peace she had fought so hard to find. "Thank you," Lucy said softly, "for not being afraid of me." Daisy's throat tightened. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever," she replied. "You reminded me that life still has surprises worth showing up for." They stood there in silence, the waves brushing the shore like a steady heartbeat. Daisy felt it then, the quiet understanding that the cabin had never truly been empty. It had been waiting for this, for healing, for connection, for the courage to open its doors again. That night, as they packed to leave, Daisy turned off the porch light and whispered, "Goodbye, David. Thank you for teaching me how to love, even through fear." She knew he would have approved. Driving away, the headlights cut through the forest path, and the cabin disappeared from view. But it no longer symbolized isolation. It was now a marker of transformation, a place where fear met compassion, and both found peace. Because that was the real story. Fear often hides opportunities for kindness. Grief can build walls or open doors. True courage isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and rooted in empathy. And every small act of goodness, no matter how simple, can change a life forever. Before long, Daisy began volunteering with local shelters, sharing Lucy's story, never to sensationalize it, but to remind others of the power of listening. Each time she spoke, she saw faces soften, hearts open. The ripples kept spreading. That's how healing works. It starts with two people choosing to care. So if you're listening tonight, remember this: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through kindness. Sometimes, it knocks softly on a cabin door in the middle of the night. And if you're brave enough to open it, you might just find the beginning of something extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share how this story moved you. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that inspire courage, kindness, and hope. Tomorrow, we'll share another incredible story, one that reminds us that even in the darkest places, light always finds a way through.